Hi, this video is to help you do the assignment on the French Revolution, in which you need to fill in the blanks. It's going to be really hard for you to do this activity if you don't pay attention to this video. So make sure to take notes. If I write a word down on the whiteboard, it means that is one of the words. It's on your word choice list. And I'm going to be doing this in the sequence of the history, which means it's the sequence of the words you have to fill in the blanks. So your reward for watching this video and for taking notes is the assignment is going to be much, much easier for you to do. So make sure you watch this video first. Don't call me or send me a message saying you need help with this assignment when you have not watched the video first. You must watch this video first before I will help you, okay? All right, so now let's just look over the history of the Haitian Revolution. Now you're going to see in the Google Classroom, I included some maps on there. Haiti, the country of Haiti, is located on an island that is called Hispaniola. The Spaniards called it Hispaniola. That was not the original name for the island. You're going to find out what the original name for the island was at the end of this lesson. But in English, we use the name the Spanish gave it, Hispaniola. This island, on one half of it is the country of Haiti, where today they speak French Creole. And then on the other half of the island is a country called the Dominican Republic, in which they speak Spanish. So one half of the island was a Spanish colony, the other half of it was a French colony. So now let's just get into the history of it, okay? So the name for Haiti, the original name for Haiti, wait, let me see if I can, just want to pull up the assignment. All right, wrong one, hold on. Here we go, the Haitian Revolution. All right. Okay, so the name Haiti was given to the island or to the country, the new nation, after the Haitian Revolution. The original name for the Haitian Revolution was called Saint-Domingue. You're going to see the spelling on your assignment. I'm probably pronouncing it badly. It's French, Saint-Domingue. Now, in this colony, this French colony of Saint-Domingue, in the year 1791, 100,000 slaves, 100,000 slaves. They led a revolt. Against the white plantation owners. Against the owners of the plantations, where they were forced to work under cruel, brutal conditions. Okay, so Saint-Domingue was, without a doubt, the worst colony in the Americas to be a slave in. This small French colony produced 60% of the coffee that was drunk in Europe and 40% of the sugar that was used in Europe. For such a small colony to produce that much product took an incredible amount of slave labor, and the slaves were 90% of the population. And to get them to work really, really hard to produce all that sugar and coffee, the slave owners were incredibly cruel to them, really cruel. They basically worked them to death. The death rate among the slaves there were so high that they were not able to reproduce and raise families in the colony. I mean, they were just worked to death and they couldn't even raise families there. So you had very few slaves who were actually born in Saint-Domingue, in the Caribbean. And they had to keep shipping in new slaves, new arrivals from Africa, because the slaves kept dying. In other colonies in the Americas, like in the USA and in Cuba and in Brazil, it was horrible. It was horrible to be a slave. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't so bad that you didn't even reach the age of being able to have kids or, you know, live long enough to raise a family. In the other colonies, slaves had kids and they raised them there, and those kids learned how to speak the colonial language. So in the USA, the slaves learned how to speak English as a first language. In the Spanish colonies, they learned how to speak Spanish. In Brazil, they learned how to speak Portuguese. In the colony of Saint Domingue, very few of the slaves could even speak French because they'd just been recently brought over from Africa. So that's how bad it was. That's how high the death rate was among the slaves. Okay, so they were led in this slave revolt against these horrible, brutal conditions. They were led by a man called Toussaint Louverture. Toussaint Louverture. So Toussaint Louverture is the national hero of Haiti. The airport is named after him in Port-au-Prince, the capital of Haiti. He's like the George Washington of Haiti. He was, and the reason he was the George Washington of Haiti was because he was just like George Washington. He was a skilled military general. So he was a military general. Okay. And he was also a diplomat. Okay. Now, Toussaint Louverture was a former slave. So this is where he was totally different than George Washington. George Washington was a slave owner. Toussaint Louverture was a slave. So Toussaint Louverture was a man of African descent, full-blooded African descent, and he was a slave. He was eventually freed. He became a free person of color. And when in Haiti, in Saint Domingue, the free people of color were able to get an education. They were able to go to military school. They actually had quite a high place in society compared to other colonies in the Americas. So that's how he was able to become a military general. He was able to get an education in the military once he had become a free person of color. So today he's remembered as the leader of Haiti's independence movement. So today he is considered the leader of Haiti's independence movement. He issued a constitution. What's a constitution? We have a constitution in the USA. It is the governing document. Our laws and our whole standards of society and how we run our country are based on our constitution. So he issued a constitution that would abolish slavery. So remember, when you abolish something, you get rid of it forever. The people who were against slavery in all of the countries of the Americas were called abolitionists, because they wanted to abolish slavery. Abolish is the verb, abolition is the noun, and abolitionist is an adjective that describes a person who wants to abolish slavery. So he issued a constitution that would abolish slavery in Saint Domingue. He became the head of government. This alarmed the French emperor. Now, who is the French emperor? The French emperor was a very, very famous man named Napoleon Bonaparte. So they had a revolution in France in 1789. The monarchy was overthrown. The king was beheaded. He was executed by guillotine, as was his wife, the queen. They started a republic. There was a power vacuum. A general named Napoleon took over, basically, long story short, he took over. He conquered many countries in Europe. And he made himself an emperor, and he was a huge, huge figure in world history. So here, especially in European history. This is my book on Napoleon. Okay, so this was the man. Look how thick that book is. This is the man who was pretty much controlling most of Europe in the early 1800s. So, where does Napoleon fit into this? Well, even though Napoleon was considered a very modern leader and had modern political ideas based on the Enlightenment, he was not very friendly to the whole abolish slavery movement in what today is Haiti. So this alarmed Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon sent 40,000 French troops to Saint-Domingue. Louverture agreed to have Saint-Domingue join the French Republic if the French abolished slavery in all of its territories. Slavery. So he said, Napoleon, we won't become an independent country. We'll join your republic if you abolish slavery in all of your colonies, all your territories. But what happened was the French arrested Toussaint Louverture and they took him back to France. And eventually Toussaint Louverture died in a French prison in 1803. Okay, so Toussaint Louverture died in a French prison in 1803. Meanwhile, in Saint-Domingue, back in the Caribbean, the second part of the Haitian Revolution began. So what's a revolution? A revolution is when the old order is overthrown, when you have a system of government that is overthrown. Traditionally, it has been when you have a king or an emperor or a czar and or a shah or whatever kind of leader you can think of that's given their position by birth. And the people overthrow that system of government and they begin a new country. Here, the Haitian Revolution was about throwing over a system of government that enslaved them. Remember that the people who participated in this revolution were slaves. That was 90% of the population. This was a slave revolt, this revolution. Okay, so meanwhile in Saint-Domingue, the second part of the Haitian Revolution began when the former slaves fought the French soldiers with guerrilla in Spanish or guerrilla in English warfare. I'll just say the English pronunciation, guerrilla warfare. The reason I don't like the English pronunciation is because it reminds me of the ape. You know, like a gorilla, an ape. It's spelled differently, G-U-E-R-R-I-L-L-A, guerrilla in Spanish. That means warrior in Spanish. So guerrilla is a warrior when it's spelled that way. Guerrilla tactics are like ambushing people, hiding in the jungle, hit and run attacks, surprise attacks. It's not standard warfare. It's like rebels, and you never know where they are, and it's like surprise attacks. So this was very successful because the slaves knew this island well. They knew it better than the French did. They were more used to the living conditions there, meaning the hot tropical climate, the diseases. They maybe had a little bit more of an immunity for the diseases than the French did. They were just better equipped to fight on this land than the French, who were just newly arrived from Europe. So the guerrilla warfare and yellow fever and other tropical diseases killed thousands of French troops. So of the 40,000 French soldiers who arrived to Saint-Domingue to control the former slaves, only 8,000 of them survived. So think about it. What is that? 32,000 Yeah, I think it works. Yeah, 30, my math is so bad. 32,000 French soldiers died trying to contain this slave revolt. So Napoleon, he sent the French troops back to France, and the slaves were victorious. They became free, and the name of Saint-Domingue was changed. They changed the name of the island, or of the country, the new country, to Haiti. And that's the name the country has today. Today it is known as the country of Haiti. And it's called Haiti. It's called Haiti because Haiti is the native Taino word that means the name that the Native Americans, the natives of that island who lived there for thousands of years before the French and the Spanish arrived there, that was the name that they had given the island. So it was kind of cool because the African slaves were like, we're not going to have this French name. We're going to give this island the name that the people who lived here before y'all came here and started enslaving people and doing all this, we're going to give it that name, Haiti. So Haiti became an independent republic in 1804. 1804. Okay, so this revolution, it wasn't taught when I was in school. I have no memory of this ever having been taught, and I was always good at history, and I remember what they taught me in history. I didn't learn who Toussaint Louverture was until I moved to New York and started teaching in New York, and my students told me who he was. They named him as one of the leaders that they could name. And I quickly learned who Toussaint Louverture was and what the Haitian Revolution was all about. This revolution was different than all of the other revolutions in the Americas because, for example, the revolution of the USA, led by George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and all the founding fathers, was a revolution of white men for white men. And when the revolution was over, slavery was not abolished, even though we had this idea that all men are created equal. We didn't abolish slavery for another 84, 85, 87 years after the revolution. And then it was the same deal in South America. So in the north of South America, you had Simón Bolívar. He was a white man. In the south of South America, José de San Martín, he was a white man. Again, a revolution by white men for white men. When the revolution was over, the living situation of African people and Native Americans did not improve. And the same thing in Brazil. In Brazil, you had a bloodless revolution. It didn't really take any fighting, but the same deal. They had the prince of the king of Portugal become their new leader, and again, whites were still in power. So the Haitian Revolution was really, really a very radical revolution. It overthrew the people in power. It got rid of the white people, and the black people took over. They freed themselves. It was about freeing people from slavery, and they ran their own country, and it was their own independent nation. And it's the first nation that was headed by people of African descent, of black people outside of Africa in the modern world. Okay, so very important thing to remember, the Haitian Revolution. And I hope this helped you with your assignment.